Hello, I'm back, and this month our PD is on active learning. Please sign your school's sign-in sheet to record your attendance at this webinar. Once again, before we begin, just a word on how to watch the I3 PD webinars. Learning occurs most powerfully when learners talk, write, and collaborate. This is the foundation of the Common Instructional Framework. The Educate Texas webinars have been created so that you can watch together in small groups during your conference period or CLC. And you'll have opportunities during each webinar to write, to collaborate, or to talk with a partner. That being said, how could we have a PD on active learning if we didn't include some active learning in the PD? So here's your chance to turn to a partner and talk about this question. Drawing from your reading of this month's newsletter, what is active learning? Now, each partner talks for 30 seconds, and you'll hear my voice when it's time for you to switch from the first speaker to the second speaker. You'll also see the timers on the screen. Now, here's who goes first. The person whose birthday is earlier in the year. So I'm going to wait just a few seconds while you and your partner figure out which of you has a birthday earlier in the year. Okay, are you ready to begin? Drawing from the reading from this month's newsletter, what is active learning? The person whose birthday is earlier in the year goes first. You have 30 seconds. I'll tell you when to switch. First speaker, you may begin. Okay, stop. And now, second speaker, it's your turn. You may begin. Okay, stop. Thank you very much. And we'll do just one more question before we move ahead. So, a related question, what does it matter? That is to say, what's the value of active learning? So, we'll go back to the first speaker. Again, 30 seconds. Again, the timer will show you how the time is elapsing, but I'll also tell you when it's time to switch speakers. The question, what is the value of active learning? The first speaker, 30 seconds, begin. Okay, and now it's time for the second speaker. You may begin. And we're done. Thank you very much. I appreciate your participation in that turn and talk conversation. Let's look at the goals for today's webinar on active learning. We want you to know what active learning means, to understand the power of active learning in fostering student achievement and other desirable outcomes, and ultimately to be able to choose and use active learning strategies in your classroom. Are you familiar with the learning pyramid? If you Google active learning, the results will yield thousands of versions of this research-based graphic. We saw it briefly last month, and again in the little video in this month's newsletter. But let's take a closer look now. Researchers have discovered that learners, and I mean adults and teens and children, retain very little of what they hear or read without support. Just 5 or 10%. But if you think about it, these are the two most common teaching strategies: teachers lecturing and students reading. And yet, our students retain very little of what they hear or read without support. Even audiovisual presentations and live demonstrations don't help much. It's better than just lecture, it's better than just reading, but it still, at best, produces only 30% retention. Think about the website BrainPop. Some of our science teachers use that. We like to show the audio visuals in class. And we think, wow, that must really be helpful. But at best, that audio visual will get kids to retain 20%, and that's if they're paying attention. The problem with all of these traditional teaching strategies is that the students are passive. And passive students just don't retain a lot. Let's move on down the pyramid. The next level is discussion group. Look what happens when you introduce classroom talk. Student retention jumps to 50% just by getting the kids to turn and talk to each other. And if you incorporate collaborative group work, they retain even more. We're up to 75% now by having the kids work together. The best case scenario is giving students responsibility for teaching each other, especially if the students build their capacity to ask questions and scaffold learning for each other. Their retention is almost 100%. You probably know the old adage, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So if our goal is for our students to learn, we'll have to use the kind of teaching strategies that make learning happen. And those strategies are active, not passive. When I'm teaching my college classes for aspiring principals, I often tell them, the person doing the talking is the person doing the learning. So think about it. Who is usually doing the talking in your classroom? If it's you, then ask yourself, who's doing the learning in your classroom? It's sometimes uncomfortable for teachers to let go of the control of the conversation. In my early years as a teacher, I thought it was my job to convey knowledge to students. Only later did I begin to understand that my job is to get students to figure it out. I've often thought I should go back and apologize to the students in my early years as a teacher. See, the person doing the talking is the person doing the learning. A number of studies have proven the value of getting students actively involved in their own learning. We've seen results like 25 percentage points improvement over passive learning. And here's a study with 38 percentage points improvement over passive learning. As teachers, we care deeply about some things that just can't be measured by standardized tests. For example, most teachers are hoping that their students develop a passion or at least an appreciation for their discipline. And we want our students to stay in school and to graduate. In fact, our school report card depends on that. And yet we struggle to figure out how to keep our students in school. The research on active learning shows that students leave school because they don't like school. And they don't like school because it's boring and, to them at least, irrelevant. So how do we fix that? The answer is active learning. Engaging students in active learning increases student retention and improves performance. But students in traditional lecture courses are twice as likely to leave and 3 times as likely to drop out as students whose teachers use active learning. Well, I hope I've convinced you. But if I've convinced you that you need to incorporate active learning in your classroom every day, you may be wondering now how to do that. And we're going to focus on that very question during our face-to-face PD in December. Meanwhile, check out this month's newsletter and especially the link for active learning strategies, where you'll find a document with a whole page of suggestions for engaging your students in active learning. Speaking of our face-to-face PD, you'll find the schedule of PD sessions in this month's newsletter as always. Please bring your lesson plans to the live PD session. And just to be clear, you don't need your computer this month. Well, thanks for watching. Please complete this survey by entering the URL in the web browser of your phone, tablet, laptop, or computer before you leave this room. I'm going to let this slide play for about 1 minute before the video ends so that you have time to copy the URL, and then the video will conclude. I'm going to see you soon at your school for our next live PD session. Thank you very much.